looks like the incoming is starting to slow down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and kick things off. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Bryce Neff, and I am the Associate Director of College Affinity and Faculty Engagement here at Lehigh University. Happy to host today's Mountain Talk with Lehigh alumni, class of 1995, Lori Goldstein, and the author of today's topic and book, Romantic Friction. So Lori is the author of the book, as well as authoring other adult and historical novels. She's a creative writing instructor at Grub Street and the founder of Think Right, where she holds creative writing classes and writing retreats. She lives in the Boston area, and she can be found on social media at Lori Goldstein Books. So with that, I'm going to pass off the presentation floor to Lori, and we're going to talk about her novel and some of the implications with generative AI and creative spaces, particularly around creative writing and publishing. So Lori, why don't you go ahead and take us away?
Great. Well, thank you, Bryce. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for having me. As Bryce said, I'm the author of 6 published novels. This most recent one is Romantic Friction under the slight pen name of Lori Gold. And my previous novels, which you should see on the screen, are 4 novels for young adults as well as an adult historical. This is a shift for me in terms of my genre into what they call book club fiction. And book club fiction is somewhat defined by tackling a topic that has discussion points. Inherent in this genre should be things a book club could read and say, oh, I want to talk more about that. I want to learn more about that. And so core to this novel is the idea of artificial intelligence or AI in the creative space. So before we start really digging into that, I want to share a little bit about what the book is about and how it incorporates this idea of AI in the creative space. So we've gotten some great press recently, including NPR and WGBH and some of the Boston news stations, really kind of wanting to have this discussion about what do we talk about when we talk about AI in the book publishing world. And I'll touch on a couple of other things as well. But in terms of Romantic Friction and the character of Sophie Wilde, Sophie Wilde is a best-selling romantasy author, and she's at the height of her career when she discovers another author has used AI to write in her style. And instead of being canceled, as we may expect in today's culture, she's embraced. The AI author is trending on social media. She's called innovative in the press. This has not happened quite yet in the real world that AI has been accepted. So this is a fictionalized version of where we might go. So the AI author is embraced by the community, and Sophie is livid because she feels like she's being copied. So Sophie arrives at the largest romance readers convention in the country and discovers the AI author has also been invited. So Sophie bands together with her fellow authors to take the AI author down any way they can, which will include committing a felony. So the novel is humorous. It's a satire. I hope people laugh the way I laughed while writing it, but it has this kind of dual focus of inside the world of publishing. I talk a lot about what it means to be an author and how do you become a published author like Sophie, who is at the height of her career. But it also talks about what are the implications of AI in the creative space. And the idea of this book being a satire and doing it in a humorous way was purposeful for a few reasons. But one of those is because this is aimed at general commercial readership out there. And I don't want people to be turned off by the idea of AI in the creative space, which they actually might be. So I try to package it in a way that offers a lot of discussion points, as I said, for this genre of book club fiction, but enough pacing and story. And as I say, they commit a felony in order to do what they're doing. It's almost like an Ocean's 11 style caper. And the inspiration for this book mirrors what I discussed about the 2 topics of it, inside publishing as well as AI. So this actually came about early in 2023. I was at a point in my career where I had 5 books published, traditionally published books by Macmillan and Penguin Random House. And I had reached a point where I wanted more success than I was finding. You know, my book wasn't on the billboard in Times Square. I wasn't a New York Times bestseller. But I had learned so much about the world of publishing by that point, and I knew what happened behind the scenes to make those things happen. As I talk about in the book, there's so much go on behind the scenes that basically preordain which books are going to be bestsellers. It's not a surprise which books hit the bestseller list. And there's so many things that the general readership doesn't know, that even published authors don't know, that goes on behind the scenes to determine this level of success in the writing world. So I had all this going on in my head, and I wanted to put it in a story, but I didn't know what kind of story that would be until ChatGPT came along. So as Bryce said, I teach classes both at Grub Street in Boston as well as through my own organization, Think Right. And I teach a lot of students who are repeat students, and I wind up knowing them quite well. So there was, this was early 2023, I was teaching on Zoom to a small group of students, and one of them came on the screen and she was just despondent. And she said, why am I even doing this? What am I doing this for? And she was worried about ChatGPT taking her job as an author. Was right when ChatGPT had kind of recently entered the public domain, and we didn't know much about it. But her fears were, will there even be a job for authors in 5 years, in 1 year, in 6 months? And we started to talk a lot about what would happen if AI took over our jobs of writing books. And it was in having those conversations and having my own thoughts about what's going on in the publishing industry and what determines success that I merged these two things. And I came up with the concept of an author who is quite successful in her career, but that career is now threatened by another author who is going to use AI to write like her and steal her readership, maybe steal her sales. So that twofold inspiration became the premise of what romantic fiction is. So I want to talk a little bit more about kind of this AI piece and what we as creators feel about AI in the creative space. And I look forward to your questions after the presentation. But many of you I know are very familiar with AI, these large language models. And I feel like a lot of what gets talked about in terms of AI right now are the things of what it can do in terms of maybe performing complex math or creating code or translation, or we're talking about, you know, the use in the medical industry and helping with diagnoses. People talk about how great it can be for research. I feel like the big thing everybody I know talks about is how great it is to edit your emails, to make your email friendlier, make it more professional. And those seem to be all uses that, you know, quote unquote, are getting accepted in the world. But then we start thinking about other things like writing a personal essay. Should it be writing a personal essay for a college application? People writing their memoirs with it, people writing their novels with it, as the AI author does in romantic fiction. So I want to talk a lot about that last piece. But before I do, I found this graphic that I thought was fascinating that you see on the screen here of the time it took for, you know, some of our most popular apps and programs to reach 100 million users. And we look at things like Netflix, 10 years, LinkedIn, 8 years, Gmail, 5 years. ChatGPT able to reach that level of users in 2 months. That's kind of astounding to me. And so I think, you know, a lot of what I'll talk about today and the answers of what we're going to be doing with these large language models are still, we don't know. Yet, with so many users, the adoption and what it can do and what people will do with it is going to happen much, much faster than any of the other things that we've been exposed to in terms of technology. So this is really the time, if we want to have thoughts and discussions about AI in any form, but especially in the creative space, the time is now. It's almost even getting past the time of now with how much adoption there is of this. So if we look a little bit about narrowing down to kind of recent AI news related to the publishing space, there's a couple of things I wanted to point to that you may or may not have heard of. But the graphic that you see for that summer reading list for 2025, I don't know if people are familiar with this. It was earlier this month in June. The Chicago Sun-Times published this list of recommended summer reading books. Now, it turns out that the freelancer who compiled this used AI to put it together. So there are books in here that don't exist. There are books that do exist that aren't new summer reading or quite older books that have been released. There are real books with the wrong author name. It is a complete unreliable piece of news. And we're talking about publishing, creative source, but this is journalism. This was used to have a summer reading list in a major newspaper, and it's nearly completely wrong. The freelancer didn't fact check anything. The editor of the newspaper didn't fact check anything. And because things tend to go out on wire services, this was republished in many other online and newspaper forms as well. And then it came out that it was completely wrong. It's somewhat astounding to me that it could reach that level, because I can just scan through this and see how many of these things, are at least books that don't go with the right author. So that's in terms of journalism, and there is a lawsuit brought by journalists against some of these AI companies. But then there is the other side of your screen there, which was recently came out about a week and a half ago or so. It is a screenshot of a book. There were two books recently, self-published books by well-known in their industry of romantasy authors, successful authors in the romantasy field that have self-published their books. And two of them in the same week, it was found that they had included by mistake prompts in their books that had said, rewrite this passage to align more with some author's style, giving it advice of how to rewrite their passage in a certain way. So both these passages came out and went all around the viral social media for a while. The authors took them down, took them out, and republished the books without these prompts. But if we're talking about, are people using AI to write their books? Certainly they are. Some of these are being found out, some we don't know. There aren't really people admitting that they're using AI to write their books right now, although recently also this month, there's a big organization called Book of the Month, and it picks books that it sends to its subscribers, which are millions of subscribers, and it picks one book a month. Their book pick this month is by James Fry. And then there was a lot of kind of talk in the industry about James having used AI to write the book. He contends that he did not. Book of the Month has kept his book as their book of the month. James has, though, been quoted in the past by saying he's using AI and training it to write in his own style. So he's training AI to write in the James Fry style, so then he can use it to perhaps write books, or he's experimenting with it. But this caused a lot of controversy that's kind of still ongoing, of people wondering, did he write the book? Did he not write the book? And also people wondering, is it going to affect his sales negatively or positively, or will that be something we can't tell right now? So that's a little bit of what's happening right now in the publishing space in terms of the use of AI. But what is behind all of this? And if you talk to authors and creative people, I think you will very much hear many of us saying the same thing of that we are worried about it and we're scared about it. And, I think there's no one whose job might be taken by technology who wouldn't say that they're worried or scared. Obviously, it's a normal response to have. But also some of the indignation over this and a little bit over why some of us in the creative space feel so strongly against the use of AI in this space is because of how these models were trained. So there's what you have on the screen here is an article from The Atlantic that Meta is one of the companies who is being sued right now by authors for copyright infringement, saying that Meta's use of taking books to train its large language model on violates copyright. Now that's going on right now in the courts. There was actually just a ruling that came into my phone before I got on here that I haven't had time to read in full. But as part of that case, there's been a lot of court documents. And one of those court documents has shown that Meta scraped a database called LibGen. And LibGen is a database of pirated books. Same way you have pirated movie sites, same way Napster used to have, music on it. Think of the same idea, but for books. So LibGen had, PDFs or other ways that people illegally uploaded full-length books onto it that users could just go down and download. Now, obviously, this is not a legal thing to do. They shouldn't be up there. We would not want people going to these places to get their, books for free. That's what a library is for. But it's very hard for authors or publishers to fight the amount of people that are illegally uploading books. So this database of LibGen has literally millions of books in it that have been illegally uploaded to it. So these court documents allegedly showed that Meta went in and scraped the database and took millions of illegal books and then it used it to train its AI. You can see on the screen there a couple of my other titles of my books there, Becoming Jinn, Screen Queens. Every single one of my books has been used, to train large language models. They're in there as well, along with probably every author you've ever read. And then the court documents went further, that the powers that be at Meta knew the books were illegal, knew they was pirated, knew they could have purchased the books, and quote unquote said, but what value do books have anyway? And it would be too expensive for us to buy all of these books. So they knowingly went in and took these books to train their AI. So this is where a lot of the violation that we feel as authors has come from, because they were taking without permission and without compensation to train these models. Now, part of the copyright cases that are going on right now are, well, what is the implication of this? Does this take money away from authors? Does it take royalties from us? Does it impact our future growth as authors? And this is something we don't quite know yet. It's a little too early to speculate what's going to happen if AI can write books in the same style that all of us authors right now can. And there's also been some talk, especially by the AI companies, that they're simply used to train. They're not plagiarizing, they're not replicating. And then lo and behold, just this week came out a study from Stanford and a couple other universities that proved that that's not the case. So this other statistic you have there with the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, they used Meta's latest tool of Llama, the third version of it, and they were able to get it to reproduce verbatim excerpts from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone at least 50% of the time. And verbatim, word for word, it was able to reproduce passages in the book. Something up to 90% or 91% that it could do of the book, but maybe not as reliably as that 50% of the time. So, this is somewhat, I don't know if it's necessarily surprising, but it's extremely concerning if we have the idea that if people use AI to write a book, write a screenplay, it's going to spit out exactly what authors have put in there, or very veiled and slightly changed versions of what we have. And you just have to start to think, where does that leave us as creators? Where does that leave us as consumers of entertainment? And this goes beyond books. So this has implications for film, TV shows, for art, for graphic design, for narration. Really anything that fits into this creative space is going to be affected by the use of artificial intelligence. A couple of things I pulled here to show you. These two covers that you see on the screen there, these two book covers, were made by AI. And there's obviously a very deep community of artists who create book covers. And both of the companies who did this are major publishers. And they initially hid the fact that AI created these covers. Then they admitted it, and I don't think either of them changed it. They basically said it was too late in the process to change it. But this idea that right now it's being used, but that companies are hiding the fact that they're using it, makes you feel like, there are moral and ethical issues involved here. And this is where the discussion needs to happen, because it's not what it can do, it's what you should be doing with it. So, the fact that people are hiding the fact that they're doing it, same as those romance authors who those prompts were left in their books, shows that we aren't embracing it yet. The world isn't embracing it yet. Will that change? That's something we all have to be talking about and thinking about. In terms of the film side, there's an Oscar-winning movie called The Brutalist. Actor Adrian Brody won the Best Actor for his role in that movie, and AI was used to help train his accent or fine-tune his accent, because he was playing a Hungarian character from Hungary. Amelia Perez did a similar thing, used AI to alter people's voices. A big way that AI is being used in the film industry is this kind of de-aging process. So that's an image from the movie here with Tom Hanks, and he was de-aged, and the actress was also de-aged. Other things of Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford was de-aged in that. The TV show Firefly Lane, the actresses were de-aged in that. Taking them as the performers, but using AI to make them look like younger versions of themselves. And that seems to be accepted. I think some people think it looks strange, but seems to be right now the marketplace is accepting of that. But when you think about the creators behind the scenes of film and TV, the writers' strike of 2023 was very much about getting protections against AI. And right now in their contracts, AI, the studios can't treat AI generative content as source material. So this means they can't go use AI to write a novel or a play and then hire a screenwriter for a lesser fee to adapt that. And there are some other protections in there. But I think these are things that are going to be popping up again and again in all forms of art. And as I said, it's ultimately going to be the marketplace that's going to decide if this is acceptable or not. Will we watch these movies? Will we want to go see a display in a gallery of AI created art? Will we want to go into a bookstore and see books written by AI on one shelf and books written by humans on another shelf? I can see that as the future just because I can see so many people wanting to use it. And the further we get from us creators who have been creating art on our own without AI, the more acceptable something becomes, the longer I think it's part of our kind of lexicon and community. So before we turn it over to questions, which I'd love to, kind of have this conversation going, and that's why I wrote Romantic Friction, was to have these kinds of conversations. I wanted to just give you a slight flavor in a couple minutes here of what I'm talking about, what it means if AI were going to create a novel or write a novel based on a prompt or based on something that the author did. So I actually took my synopsis for Romantic Friction, and synopsis means the full story from start to finish, not just a summary of it, the entire thing with all your major plot points written out. It was probably about 5 pages, single spaced or so. And I dropped that into ChatGPT and I asked it to write the first page. So I want to show you what that looked like, and then I can show you the actual front page, and we can actually talk about that as part of our discussion as well. So this is the first thing that it spat out in terms of, this is the first one I want to show. This is the first one it spat out as the first pages of my novel. Chapter 1. Sophie Wilde had punched exactly one person in her life. It happened in a hotel closet surrounded by folding chairs and an unnervingly large poster of herself. She missed, mostly. But the fall had been loud. In her defense, it had been a really long week. 7 days ago, she'd been doing the thing she loved most, lying in bed at 2 a.m., reading reviews of herself on Reddit under a burner account. Her final book in the Fated Realm series was about to release her grand finale. 10 years, 10 books, one bruised spine from signing events, and an entire subculture that now dressed like her protagonist and argued online about whether a fire demon could ethically date a half-wraith. She was a brand, a phenomenon, a household name, assuming her household owned at least 3 swords. But then came her, Hartley West. And I'll pause there because I just want to briefly compare this, which is not the worst thing I've ever read. I don't love that it goes right into a flashback. If this were one of my students, I would say, don't start the story with a flashback. Get us into the story a little bit more. But it's not awful. I don't think it's great. I think it's a little too quick for my taste. But again, we can talk about that. But here's a little snippet of my actual opening, just as a comparison, and as we think about what it's doing versus what an author is doing. So this is my actual first page. It's a commonly held belief that in order to be a good author, you have to be drunk or tortured. To be a great author? Both. I am a great author. I am occasionally drunk, though not at present, but I am not prone to sprawled on the bathroom floor bawling. I have not, nor will I ever utter the phrase, please don't make me adult today. And I am not the least bit disturbed by crawling into a king-size bed alone. All that's to say, I am not, nor have I ever been tortured. But there truly is a first time for everything. The bookstore buzzes like an active hive. Beyond these rolling partitions masquerading as shelves, cushioned folding chairs cradle bums of all shapes and sizes and stages of cellulite. They are here for me, as I am here for them. This is my hometown, and this is the bookstore in my hometown that Jocelyn and Torrance and Callum and little Vance built, word by word, page by page, chapter by chapter, book by book, that I share with no one. I am not a charity. My coattails are not for riding. Tell that to Lacey, my publicist for the last 10 years. I already did, multiple times and with only one expletive, which honestly is the definition of restraint. And yet I am here because Blair, my agent with a heart mushier than a ripe peach, intervened on Lacey's behalf and asked me to be. Listen, that this industry is harder to navigate than Gen Z slang is not lost on me. I'm not completely averse to the idea of paying it forward, even though when I was starting out, no one gave me so much as a linty nickel. But you can be damn sure that if a best-selling author who helped to define my genre had invited me via said publicist to a bookstore celebration of their blockbuster series, I'd have been on time. Not late by 20 minutes and counting. Okay, thank you, everyone. I look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Lori. I think it's really interesting to see the exact example that you're presenting of like what is truly author generated, independent, from your brain type of story creation, and then seeing what ChatGPT would feel just like a very cheap version kicks out and copies. Like it's one of the questions that you and I had discussed, prior to starting the presentation was thinking about like the emotional implication. Is there the possibility that AI can truly generate an emotional response or write in a way that evokes emotions and experiences? I think based on your example, at least at this point in the way that models are structured, I would say no. But what is your take on how the way that ChatGPT or other LLMs are progressing? Like, do you think that there's a potential one day that this could be indistinguishable from a real author?
You know, I unfortunately think it probably will be just because the technology continues to evolve. When I did this exercise, when I first started my novel in writing it in 2023, I asked it to write something and it made no sense. So even in the couple of years since I did this, it's definitely gotten much better. And what I think is interesting about this experiment that I did is my synopsis, the book is written with humor, as I said, and my synopsis reflected that, the way it was written. So it was pulling on what it knew the tone of the book was going to be. And it has a couple of jokes in there, what it wrote. That's not the depth of humanity, but being able to already reflect the tone of something, I think shows that it probably will get there. And again, it's getting there because it's going to be continually trained by books that have shown that emotion.
Mhm.
And I think partly what starts to happen is the more you learn how to manipulate the AI, and I think there are probably better programs as well, I think the more you as the person putting in the targeted prompt, add more emotion to this, make the character sadder, pull on a like real world example of someone being betrayed. The more you direct it, I feel like the better it will actually become and continue to become as time goes on. Will it ever get there? I don't know. I feel like technology always does things we don't expect. So I don't feel like I could ever use the word it will never get there. I just think we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's almost like looking at the progression of technology where, within the last 5 years, who would have thought that we would have, AI generated engines that you can have an entire conversation with and really get into the depths of whatever type of topic that you want. 15 years ago, to think that I could like look on my phone and access the internet, at the palm of my hand with the invention of the iPhone, like who could have comprehended that before it actually came out?
Right.
20 years before that, the internet, and then you can continue to see these progressions kind of throughout history and throughout technology as it goes. So who's to say what is the thing that's going to come out tomorrow or in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years to say that these aren't, genuine, components that are going to just absolutely blow our minds. So we've got a couple of questions that are starting to flow in. I'll start just at the top and work our way down. So this one first submitted by Eric. So will one day AI want to be compensated via money for its work, and will it want to be credited? I think Lori, this kind of goes back to your initial point about like, will the market accept it? Will it be something that people will want to read, and will there be enough of a response to it that the AI is really even going to compensate or like comprehend like what money is. So I think that kind of almost plays into the emotion of it. But say we do eventually get to a point where AIs are autonomous enough to understand and grapple with that concept. Like, what are your thoughts around AIs having a voice and saying like, hey, I want to be credited as an author for XYZ book?
Well, I think that's going to come from the companies that create the AI. So even right now, I talked about ChatGPT and using that, which is free at a certain level, and you pay for other levels. And then there are other programs, Copilot, that is a business-oriented one that is paid for. But there are already right now AI, models that are geared more towards writing a novel. And there's one called Pseudo-Write and a couple of others. And the idea is that you will pay a subscription fee in order to use that to write your novel. So that's already existing. So, the AI itself being compensated will come through the people who are creating the AI programs.
Gotcha. All right, so Neil asks, oh, sorry, coming and kick me down for a second. Don't you think you still need your own voice, tone, style in order for AI to copy? So not necessarily, or technically necessarily make it obsolete. I think that that's a fair point. Like the AI has to be trained on something. It needs to have some kind of source material to be able to compare it against. So I think that there is still a genuine need for creativity and life experience and all of those other components.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure I agree, to be honest with you, because if I say, if I just want to write something in the style of Stephen King, it just can pull on everything that Stephen King wrote, and I don't have to have my own to write like Stephen King or to have a book that evokes the readers of his work and pulling on everything he's done. I think what we're talking about is wanting to preserve authors having their own voice and their own tone, which brings an originality and a uniqueness to the world. At some point, if everybody's just saying, write like this person, write like that person, write like this person, we're all eventually going to become an amalgamation of the same thing. And we're going to lose that originality factor that the question is getting at.
Gotcha. All right, so Richard asks, for me, there's a profound issue for what is supposed to be, quote, nonfiction becoming no longer truth, but now a work of fiction through AI, but unbeknownst to the viewer. Particularly important to me as a nonfiction author and photographer. Yeah, I mean, I think as it comes to nonfiction, like looking at the creative aspects versus non-creative aspects, like a nonfiction, like what are the potential implications for how books are written in terms of biographies or historical novels and things of that nature?
I think as scary as it is for the creative space, it is extremely scary for nonfiction because as that Chicago Sun-Times piece that showed that was just trying to create a summer reading list, it was false. It wasn't true. So if people are relying on AI to say, I want to write a biography of George Washington, and you just take everything that it spits out, there's a high likelihood that a lot of that is not true information. And it's so anything you take in a nonfiction sense obviously has to be fact checked. But as time goes on, where are we fact checking? And are we continuing to fact check in other AIs? What are the sources that we're using to ensure this is true? The idea that AI can be a shortcut for things is problematic. I mean, there's been many stories about how, people at law firms have used them for briefs and things, and AI wants to give you an answer. It is designed to give you an answer. So if it doesn't know, it doesn't say it doesn't know, it makes it up. And they're called these like AI hallucinations. So this is the scary part when you get into anything nonfiction, because it is just making things up, and it's making, in the law field, it was making up cases that just don't exist. So if somebody looks at that and just takes that whole hog and says like, well, it's got its own citation for that case. Well, it's a made up citation. You're getting in this like spiral of misinformation that is really troubling for the nonfiction world.
Yeah, it makes me think like in the future, like a student in elementary school who's doing a book report on George Washington, and it says, "Can you bring up an image of George Washington crossing the Delaware?" And rather than being George Washington crossing on a boat, George Washington is crossing on a Tyrannosaurus Rex, like something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Todd asks, this is an interesting question that, so let's, for example, say that the market does accept AI generated content, and then we do have that example of AI generated books and author generated books. So is there a possibility that books and other art forms may be labeled as, quote, non-AI, like non-GMO food is, and perhaps creating premium markets for art goods created completely organically? I think this is an interesting concept because if you say those AI books did come in and they cost $1 to be able to purchase, and a regular book right now is anywhere from 10, 15, 20 or more dollars. No, I think that could create a massive amount of value for organically generated author books and stories. But what are your thoughts around that? Like, do you think that that would be something that could be a possibility?
I do. I think there's got to be a couple things that would happen. One, the marketplace has to be accepting of it. Two, they have to be, how are we enforcing this? How are we, are authors self-labeling that it's an AI book? What are publishers doing to ensure that the work they're publishing is not AI? If we're going to have a premium on original content versus AI content, there's going to have to be a lot of changes in the publishing of the traditional publishing world, at least, in order to ensure that you're actually getting original content. So there are a lot of parameters that I think are involved in that. And I think not to be a broken record, but still coming back to the fact that those people who are writing the books via AI and charging $1 for it are still making a profit and only able to do what they did because many authors, thousands and thousands of authors' books were used to train those models, and they never got compensation for it. So, it's still kind of that like underpinning of like what's okay and not okay if someone's making money off of my books because they took them, illegally, and were able to then use it in doing this other form. I think that's where the sticking point still kind of gets to. So does that become resolved out of these copyright infringement lawsuits in some capacity? I don't know. We'll have to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think the ethical implications for it, like not even necessarily just for authors or individuals who are trying to pursue a career as an author, but I've seen examples on social media of people that are doing quote unquote side hustles and saying like, oh, go into this language model and ask it to create a children's book story for you, and then go into this other language model and have it create artwork for that book. How do you know that that artwork and that storyline isn't being ripped off from
Yeah,
other legitimate authors and legitimate sources? And it's not
right.
just the publishers who are potentially at liability for those copyrights, but it's also that person who's just trying to make a few extra bucks for his family or his or her family and their their livelihood. But
Yeah,
then you're opening yourself up to a massive potential lawsuit and the loss of those things. So again, is it really worth it?
right. Yeah, just
Um,
seeing actually a comment from Cheryl that just came in here. I don't know if you've seen this, Bryce, but
yep.
from a freelance editor component perspective, I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. So for those that can't see, so Cheryl, she writes, I'm a freelance book editor. About 4 years ago, I was hired to edit a nonfiction business book. When the publisher and I were on the call with the author, we were surprised to learn that the author was going to use AI to create his book chapters. We told him that we didn't feel comfortable with that because of the very real possibility that he will get false information, and also that a lot of the content will be, quote, stolen from existing materials, and we didn't want to get sued for a copyright violation. We backed out of the deal, and I have no idea if the author ever did produce that book. So that's a firsthand, real world example of exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think to the point there of what we're talking about, I nothing in my contract that I've had, which was signed in 2024, says anything about me attesting that I didn't use AI to do it or there's original content. Actually, you know what? I might actually be backtracking. I don't think it specifically says IA, but IAI, sorry, but it does say that it's my original work.
Mm-hmm.
So probably that language is going to continue to evolve to include some of this. And, yes, it doesn't stop you if you want to lie, you can lie. But, right now, again, the beginning of Romantic Friction, it's the first book I've had that says in the copyright, this can't be used to train large, AI models. That's the first book I've ever had that has that in it, yet if we think allegedly Meta stole all of these books anyway, does it matter that that's in there? But, publishing is a slow industry on the traditional publishing side, so slow to make some changes.
Sure. So we've got a few minutes left, folks. Lori, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want you, if you could, drop in the chat a link to somewhere where our audience can maybe pick up the book if they're interested in reading it and
Great.
supporting you. Just so that way, if you want to get your hands on a copy, it's easily accessible for them. So a couple other questions. So Kimberly asks, I work in educational publishing and my company is trying to embrace AI as a tool without involving it in content creation. Our main concern is the impact on students. If we use AI to create materials, we can't dissuade students from using AI in their writing. Do you have any thoughts on AI in regard to developing readers and writers?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this, obviously, and I'm not in a traditional classroom with younger students, but I teach adult writers. And, I think the worst thing we can do for all of this, which is why I wanted to write this book and why I wanted to have these conversations, was you can't ignore it. It's there. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. AI is there. Adults are going to use it. Kids in school are going to use it. So I think we need to talk about what's good about it, what's not good about it, all the things I talked about today of where it came from, why it can help you write your essay, understand the background of it, because I do think, at least when I've been in front of younger people and they learn some of this background that they don't know, they do have that slight ick factor over using it. Now, maybe not all of them, but some of them do. But instead of ignoring that it exists and that it's a tool that they can use, teach them how it can be a tool. So things like, this is the topic of the essay. Help me brainstorm 5 ways I could talk about AI in the creative space. and then see what it says, and then go off and write your own. Use it for research, perhaps, but double check it. Don't rely on it. Go somewhere else, and not just Wikipedia. Go somewhere, to a real source to kind of verify the information that it's telling you. I think there is a way to use it in schools and to acknowledge that kids are going to use it, but to use it in a way that doesn't replicate. Because there was just this study about the more people use AI, the more they can't do anything for themselves. And that's a real danger. So I think if we ignore it, they're going to use it anyway. Let's come up with the parameters to help them use it in ways that can be helpful, that can maybe be a little bit more efficient, but still allows their own brain to be doing the bulk of the work. And I think I don't know the exact tools for that, but I think that's what we need to all start really talking about.
Yeah, and I think as it pertains to AI is impacting our lives in pretty much every area that you can think of, whether it's creative spaces, research spaces, all these different avenues. Actually, very timely, the university received an email from Provost Nathan Irvin today regarding a working group that faculty and staff were addressing regarding the use of generative AI around Lehigh's campus. So as it pertains to your own lives, whether it's, your children's schools or organizations or companies that you're working with, if you're not asking the questions around how AI is being used or what types of sources or what are the allowances or the contingencies of from which it can be used, those are things that you need to be asking and need to be considering in your own lives as well. Benny, I think that's how you say your name. I apologize if I mispronounced it. Asks, is it just a matter of citations? Authors who borrow material are asked to reveal their sources. Should it be mandated that AI material be transparent about sources? I think it's a fair question to ask. Whether or not that the programming within the AI will abide by that is a different story. Or from what we can see, again, from that Chicago article, like it created the sources, but half those books don't exist.
Right.
Um, let's see. All right. And then a comment from Neil. I think maybe we'll allow this to be kind of our closing comment. This is almost too depressing to contemplate this average watered down beige future world. Is the Pandora's box open and can no longer be closed? How do we fight back as it is through technology with algorithms and watermarks to discern AI material? My fear is that the market does not accept AI content more and more, and that original human generated content becomes a niche market. It's entirely a possibility. Who knows?
Yeah, I think you exactly summed up how many of us in the creative world feel. And so, what can we do? It feels like it's a drop in a bucket, but I guess like continue to support the art that was created by human, the books, the paintings, the films and TV shows. And if you're in an opportunity to voice an opinion, to push why it's important to keep these creative sources. I mean, I think the more we say it and the more we don't let it be accepted for as long as we can, the more we will be the marketplace deciding, and you decide with your dollars. If there's a great book written by AI, but we don't buy it, then someone else isn't going to look at it as a path to kind of write their novel. So it's kind of on us as consumers to really support the artists that are still here doing the work.
Yep. So lots of big questions, lots of unknowns. We really appreciate all of you for joining us with this conversation. Thank you very much to Lori for coming in and having this conversation with us and for showcasing her new book. If anybody has any follow-up questions or would like to reach out to you, Lori, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so the best way to get in contact with me, I can put it in the chat. I'm on Instagram at Lori Goldstein Books, and I check my DMs all the time, or my email, Lori at Lori Goldstein Books. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong thing.
That's all right. Sorry, did that just for hosts and panelists, so I'm gonna drop that back
Oh,
in
sorry.
for everybody. That's okay. Uh, giving me issues at the moment, but also for everyone, there will be a follow-up email that'll go out 24 hours from today. I'll make sure to include Lori's Instagram handle and contact information, so if you did want to reach out to her afterwards, as well as to complete the survey to let us know your thoughts on the presentation and propose any other additional topics. So with that, we'll get you back to the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a lovely rest of your week. Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.